Hello and welcome. I'm Leigh-Ann Gerrans and you're watching W News, broadcasting live from the Al Arabiya studios. These are our top stories. Zelenskyy warns that Russia aims to expand the war beyond Ukraine as he urges more international military support. Iran vows it will never seek nuclear weapons and slams Israel at the UN. Jimmy Kimmel makes an emotional return to late-night TV, defending free speech after a controversial suspension. And we're expecting Saudi Prince Turki Al Faisal to join us shortly to discuss the growing momentum at the UN to recognize a Palestinian state. Now, Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelenskyy told the UN General Assembly that Russia is looking to expand its war beyond Ukraine. He warned that Russian drones are already flying across Europe and called for more military aid to help Kyiv defend itself. Zelenskyy stressed no one can feel safe right now as he urged international support to stop Moscow's aggression. Here's more of what he had to say.
Yesterday we had a good meeting with President Trump, and I also spoke with many other strong leaders, and together we can change a lot. Yes, much depends on the G7 and G20, but in the end, peace depends on all of us, on the United Nations. So don't stay silent while Russia keeps dragging this war on. Please speak out and condemn it. Please join us in defending life and international law and order. People are waiting for action.
For more on this, I'm joined by Dana Lewis, one of the first journalists who interviewed Vladimir Putin. A pleasure to have you on the show, Dana. Thank you so much. Great to have you. So we just heard there from Zelenskyy. He gave that speech. It did strike a pragmatic tone, but he stressed to world leaders the importance of military might in order to maintain peace. What do you think Putin's reaction will be to this speech?
Well, I think that, Putin will maintain his normal posture, which is that Ukraine can't win. And the only way for this to end is for Ukraine to disarm, to pull back, to cede territory. And that's been Putin's, very consistent message all along. But I think that, Zelenskyy was selling there. He was, first of all, coming to grips with the fact that, Trump is not promising new weapon shipments to Ukraine. He'll continue to sell weapons through NATO to Ukraine, and NATO can disperse those weapons as they choose, but not direct shipments like the Biden administration had given Ukraine. And at the same time, it was interesting to listen to some of the language from Zelenskyy today, because he was talking about drone warfare and artificial intelligence, and this is the greatest arms race now, and a very dangerous one. And he suggested that Ukraine has a lot of technology now that it can sell and provide to other countries. So I think that he was trying to invite people to support Ukraine from a moral perspective, but he was also enticing them in terms of the defensive weapons that they have now to sell and share with other countries as well.
But what about Donald Trump's big shift on Ukraine in his Truth Social post yesterday? It was a surprise to many, and he suggested Ukraine can win back land from Russia, which he called a paper tiger, and the Kremlin has hit back. But do you think Russia has now lost Donald Trump?
I think that Donald Trump is just walking the line, and we'll talk about that in a minute. But why was it a big shift? I mean, Trump, from the beginning of his presidency, this second term, has said that the only way this is going to end is for Ukraine to cede territory, that Ukraine is losing, Ukraine is being destroyed. Ukraine has got to come to the table, and it's got to give up land to Russia, and that's the only way through negotiations that the fighting will end. And then suddenly in this Truth Social post, it's pretty remarkable, right? I mean, he has said Ukraine is showing courage, they can fight, essentially, and that they can not only hold Russia back, but push back Russia to the land that Russia invaded, and maybe even beyond, he said, whatever that meant. But I mean, it is remarkable that President Trump has suddenly said that Ukraine can win. And what's he trying to do? I mean, it would appear that on one hand, he's trying to put pressure on the Kremlin and say, you know what, Ukraine does have the cards. After telling Zelenskyy in that horrible meeting that took place in the White House that he has no cards to play, suddenly he's saying Ukraine could win and could take back that 20% of the country that has been lost to Russian forces. And he's sending a message to Russia that, you know, the only way that this is going to end probably is through negotiation. But the one thing that he said at the end of it, which I think a lot of people are worried about, is he said he wishes both countries luck. I mean, that sounds like a President Trump who has been unable to solve the conflict, suddenly taking a step back and saying, good luck to both of you. The U.S. doesn't want to be involved in this anymore. They'll sell weapons to NATO, but they're going to pull back from the negotiation, the attempt to get the two sides to negotiations and to try and bring about a ceasefire or a long-term peace.
And, you know, you bring about a good point there, because since the Alaska summit between Donald Trump and Vladimir Putin, the negotiations towards a ceasefire or a peace deal seem to have just come to an absolute halt. So do you think there is a real possibility now that the US could say, we've tried everything, we leave it to Europe, we leave it to them to negotiate with Russia, and basically we're out?
Yeah, I mean, if there's going to be a negotiation at all. And it seems like that, you know, every time we go from maybe there's a chance of negotiation, that really what comes about is an escalation. So you're seeing now Russia, you know, these overflights with drones drones and aircraft into Estonia and into Poland. And then Trump was asked, should NATO respond? Could NATO fire at Russian planes? And he said, yeah, they could. I mean, they're essentially saying that NATO would be in its right, depending on the circumstances. So there's real chance of escalation. And I think the U.S. president, because he wasn't able to bring about a peace in Ukraine and between Russia in 48 hours, as he had promised on the campaign trail, is just tired now of it. The one thing to watch for today, I think, is on the sidelines of the United Nations meeting, you'll have Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov and the Foreign Secretary Marco Rubio meeting, and they're probably meeting as we speak right now. It'll be interesting to see what comes out of that discussion. And Rubio, even after Trump's comments, has suggested the only way that this is going to end is through negotiation. So he continues to push the idea that the two sides have got to get together and bring about at least a ceasefire through discussions over the negotiating table.
Dana, we don't have much time left, but just a quick question. I also saw that Donald Trump did really focus in on Russia's economy and the fact that that is beginning to fail and it's pushing the Kremlin's back against the wall. Do you agree with that sentiment?
I mean, you talk to people that have been in Russia, and I have friends that go there, and things are not as bad as the media sometimes will portray, but they are in trouble, and they are having trouble with domestic oil and gas production, and the EU is threatening more sanctions and putting more pressure on Slovakia and also Hungary to cut off their oil exports and or oil imports from Russia's exports. And clearly, even the Russians have acknowledged that, yes, there are pressures and there are problems and there are growing problems, I think, in Russia with the economy.
Dana Lewis, it was an absolute pleasure to have you on. Thank you for your thoughts, insights and time. Let's continue this conversation now with Franak via Corker, Chief of Staff to Belarus's opposition leader, and he's joining us live from New York. Looks like you've been there for the UN General Assembly, Franak, and a real powerful speech by Zelenskyy. What was your overall view on his address to the United Nations?
Zelensky made a good impression to all the audience. People are applauding him. It seems that he is winning the world attention and world support compared to Putin, because Russia cannot justify this war anymore. Even those countries in the global south who were cheering Putin in 2022 right now are taking closer to Zelensky's position. It's primarily thanks to very good Ukrainian diplomacy, to the unity of the European Union, which speaks with one voice. Also, thanks to President Trump's yesterday's statement, this tweet, this post he has made, which was quite surprising, unexpected, honestly speaking. But I think all the people here, in the corridors of the assembly, they discussed this position of Trump because it seems to be much more pro-Ukrainian than Trump was a few months ago.
Yes, definitely. And I think a lot of the world was surprised by that Truth Social post and the shift by Donald Trump supporting Ukraine steadfast yesterday. But in your opinion, what happens if the world ignores Zelensky's pleas to take action against Vladimir Putin now? Will Putin just continue to expand the war, as Zelensky did suggest? Because we have seen them fly drones into NATO airspace.
Absolutely. Putin does not intend to stop the war. Maybe he needs some small break, 1 or 2 years, to prepare the new wave of the war, new wave of escalation. And then the target could be not Ukraine, it could be Baltic states, could be Poland, could be even Finland. And we see already this fighter jets flying over Estonia, drones in Romania, drones flying to Poland. These are all, let's say it's testing the red lines, testing the reaction of the West. Also, we see in Belarus, in my own country, how the state enterprises, they are producing weapons to Russia. And most of these deals are targeted to 2027 to be finished. Basically, for Putin, probably the next escalation phase must take place in 1 or 2 years from now. And we must be aware, if we want to stop Putin, if we want to prevent the escalation, we must show unity, bravery. Europe must weaponize, must speak one voice with the United States. If there will not be unity, Putin will go further. And definitely for Russia, this war is blessing, because the war is a good justification for terror, for repression, for economic decline. Also, thanks to the war, Putin's economy is functioning. If he stops the war right now, there will be a big economic crisis, and Putin doesn't want that.
And right now, you are at the UN General Assembly. What's the feeling on the ground there when it comes to the war between Ukraine and Russia? Do people think that there's actually a possibility that it could come to an end through negotiations and the Kremlin may stop the war machine?
It's a good question. I think 50-50. 50% believe there is much bigger chance for ceasefire, for some deal. But there are 50% who believes there will be an escalation anyway. And there is no any chance to stop Putin. And we have just to invest in the weapons, in army, in defense, especially European Union countries. They are in such situation when they have prepared for the wars. We all pray, we all want the war to be ended as soon as possible. But the truth is, with Putin, it's highly unlikely. And what Putin does in recent months after Alaska summit, it's not intent to end the war, but opposite. He does everything to escalate and to expand the geography of the war. And people here are worried, not only people in Europe, but also people in Asia and Middle East. Even in Northern Africa, they speak about Ukraine because it also impacts them economically and politically.
And my first guest I had on, I did speak to him about Russia's economy, because Donald Trump did say that Russia is weak economically. Do you agree with that sentiment? And do you think more sanctions need to come into place?
Absolutely. Sanctions do work. Sanctions do not change the regime, maybe immediately, but sanctions weaken the economy, weaken the war machine, weaken the state apparatus. And in case of Russia, we see how it works. This year, Russian economy is stagnating. Belarus economy, from my country, which depends a lot on Russia, is stagnating too. And right now, Russia cannot make a big move on the front line in Ukraine because they are very limited with resources, with army, with troops, with weapons. So we need more sanctions. The idea of secondary sanctions or secondary tariffs by the United States and the European Union might work. Oil's cap price might work too, but we need the political will to do that. More sanctions, weaker Russia. Weaker Russia, more chance the war will end sooner.
Franak via Corker, thank you so much for joining us. I appreciate your time. Now, Iran's president has told the UN General Assembly that his country has not sought and will never seek to build a nuclear bomb, citing a ruling from Supreme Leader Ayatollah Khamenei. He sharply criticized Israel, calling its actions aggression rooted in coercion and bullying. Pezeshkian also outlined a vision for a radiant future where Iran stands strong alongside powerful neighbors against what he described as a grand project that imposes genocide in the region. For more on this, I'm joined by Mark Fitzpatrick, former head of non-prolific and nuclear policy. Mark, it's always good to have you on the show. Thank you so much for your time. So we heard there from a pleasure. So as I was saying, we heard from Iran's president who addressed the UN General Assembly today, saying Iran has no intention to build nuclear weapons. How credible is this claim in the context of regional tensions and also past programs in Iran?
Yeah, exactly. Look, nobody believes that. It's something that Iran has been saying for many years. And well, it has an element of truth in that the Supreme Leader issued a fatwa, religious prohibition against nuclear weapons some years ago. Fatwas can be changed. So Pezeshkian says Iran has no nuclear weapons, no intentions to build one. They might not have an intention today, but tomorrow, who knows? As you say, regional tensions could give them reason to think that they need a nuclear weapon. And in fact, there's an increasing mood in the country that after Israel's bombing and U.S. bombing, that they do need something like that.
So Iran's president also called the U.S. operation to destroy their nuclear facilities a grave betrayal to diplomacy. And this comes just a day after we heard Donald Trump speaking at the UN General Assembly yesterday, and he really praised that Operation Midnight Hammer that those stealth bombers from America carried out. These countries are just so far apart right now, aren't they?
Oh, gosh, they are such opposite poles right now. It's difficult to think how they could ever come together if there were to be negotiations. And Supreme Leader said there can't be any nuclear negotiations. I mean, any diplomat could come up with some ideas of compromises, but it would take a willingness to compromise that neither side has shown.
Pezeshkian also criticized Israel and spoke of a grand project threatening the region. How might these remarks impact Iran's relationship with the West?
Yeah, his remarks are not going to do anything to overcome Iran's bad relations with the West, particularly after he also singled out Britain, France, and Germany as, being perfidious in their dealings with Iran. I think Pezeshkian's audience, though, is not the West. It's probably more Iran's neighbors. By talking about Israel's intentions for the region, Iran would like to paint itself as a partner of the Arab world in resisting the imperialist West.
And Mark, I thought this was interesting. Iranian and European officials are due to hold talks at the UN this week. And do you think we could see an agreement to stop the renewal of international sanctions on Iran that could further cripple the economy because of that snapback that's been put in place?
Yeah, I was expecting that there have to be some talks because the snapback sanctions will come into place on Saturday. That's the deadline. Now, in diplomacy, right before a deadline like this, you always see a lot of activity to try to find some compromise to at least to push back the deadline, to buy some more time. And I think that's what talks will be aimed at. Is there a way to buy any more time? Can the deadline be postponed for a month or more?
And also, let's talk a little bit about what Donald Trump yesterday said. So he spoke at the General Assembly, and I actually thought what he said on nuclear weapons was quite interesting. He says they pose a great danger. What did you make of his comments when it comes to this? And is nuclear war inching closer? Should there be a real concern about nuclear weapons?
No, as a nuclear wonk, an arms control advocate, I'm pleased that President Trump said that at the UN. It's something that's been on his mind for a long time. He often does say that nuclear weapons are a grave concern. He hasn't done anything about it, but it's a possibility that he could. You know, the relations with Russia, the nuclear agreement with Russia to limit nuclear arms, it comes up. It ends next February, and Russia has said they'd be willing to extend that. And now Trump's mentioning of concern about nuclear weapons. I think the United States and Russia could reach a deal to extend the limits on nuclear weapons. That would be the best outcome from these vague talks.
Mark Fitzpatrick, it was a pleasure to have you on the show. Thank you so much. Let's take a look at some of the other stories making the headlines today. At least 3 people have died in a shooting at a U.S. Immigration and Customs Enforcement facility in Texas. The gunman was also killed, and 2 of the victims were detainees at the Dallas Center. Authorities say at least 1 other person was injured in the incident. A South Korean battery plant CEO has been sentenced to 15 years in prison over a deadly workplace fire that killed 23 workers. The head of the Arsal and his son were convicted under the country's industrial safety law after investigators found the factory operated without proper safety measures or employee training. A man convicted of attempting to assassinate President Donald Trump tried to stab himself moments after hearing the verdict. A jury found that 59-year-old Ryan Ruth plotted to kill the president last year while he was golfing. Prosecutors said Ruth hid behind a fence with a rifle but fled when a Secret Service agent did spot him. He's set to be sentenced on the 18th of December. The group planning America's 250th birthday has fired its Trump-appointed director for breaches of authority and trust. Officials accuse Ariel Abougé of taking over a social media account without approval, which he does deny. So he was fired over a post about conservative activist Charlie Kirk. The White House will help pick a replacement amid concerns the 2026 celebrations could become political. Now, a journalist fired by Australia's national broadcaster over a social media post on Gaza has won nearly $100,000. The Australian Broadcasting Corporation must pay radio host Antoinette Lattouf this amount on top of around $50,000 in earlier damages. Now, Jimmy Kimmel returned to his late-night TV show last night, tearfully defending free speech after a brief suspension over his comments on the killing of conservative activist Charlie Kirk. The comedian criticised what he called mob tactics by the FCC and local ABC affiliates, while also taking aim at President Donald Trump. Kimmel also said he never intended to blame any group for Kirk's death and praised those showing forgiveness. Take a listen to his emotional speech.
I've been hearing a lot about what I need to say and do tonight, and the truth is, I don't think what I have to say is going to make much of a difference. If you like me, you like me. If you don't, you don't. I have no illusions about changing anyone's mind. But I do want to make something clear because it's important to me as a human, and that is, you understand that it was never my intention to make light of the murder of a young man. I don't...
For more on this, I'm joined by entertainment reporter Stephanie Tecci. Stephanie, there we are. Jimmy Kimmel returning to our TV screens last night. He was choked up as he addressed the audience. What more did he have to say, and what did you make of his speech?
Well, Leigh-Ann, some would say that it was somewhat a win for free speech in the sense where this man was almost cancelled a week ago and really at risk of losing his well-loved show. But one thing about that speech, he touched all areas, saying that, look, I wasn't making a mockery of Charlie Kirk, Steph. I've extended my compassion to the family. But he said everything. He touched all the corners about, being at odds with Disney over this move. But there was the one word that he didn't say, and the one word he didn't say was sorry. And this is a man who's clearly not sorry for his actions, but he's regretted that it's come to this stage in America that comedians such as himself and other late night hosts have we seen, like Stephen Colbert, are at risk of losing their shows because they do say something which he says that the administration doesn't like. Clearly, there is still no love lost between him and Trump. He, continued to make jokes about Trump, and during his show, he had a sketch with Robert De Niro as well, who made, blatant remarks about President Trump's appearance. And so here's a man who I think he's regretful that it's got to this stage where his show could have been cancelled, but he's not regretting of being someone who is a critic of Donald Trump.
And I found that really interesting because exactly what you said there, he didn't say sorry. And Stephanie, we have to also think many people are surprised Kimmel was given his job back so soon. And they're asking what prompted his return?
Well, Leigh-Ann, there was this growing anger as we've seen over the past week where people have been trying to defend freedom of speech for comedians especially. And when you're thinking about a man like Jimmy Kimmel being cancelled for saying something which was a bit tongue-in-cheek and light-hearted, it didn't make sense. It shows how much power he has. And what was clear, there was a growing, increasing boycott against Disney. So I think Disney had to play their cards right here because, look, if you're going to cancel Jimmy Kimmel over something like this, who else are you going to cancel? So what you're trying to say is that the media can no longer be about democracy. And I think for Disney, that was too much of a heavy burden for them to bear. And, Jimmy has discussed that, he was not pleased with what happened. And you know what? I won't be surprised if Jimmy doesn't last long with that network because you would want your network to support your talent in a situation like this. They had a very touching conversation with Jimmy about this loud there, but clearly he's still unhappy with the way things unfolded. But Disney, I think, had a lot to lose here if they cancelled Jimmy Kimmel.
Well, it's really interesting because I think that is the question now. How long, Stephanie, will Jimmy Kimmel last? And if we think about it, it wasn't all pretty much back to normal for Kimmel's show. After a quarter of ABC affiliates didn't broadcast his show, why did they choose to actually not do this?
Well, there was still a lot of discussions that were happening with different networks and whether they should broadcast it, but some of them did not go. Still that kind of black and grey at the moment to see what is going to be the future for the show.
Sorry, we are...
a lot of...
Stephanie, I do apologise. We are having problems with your connection. I do apologise. Stephanie Tecci, I just wanted to say thank you so much for joining us. For more on this, I'm joined by former Trump campaign surrogate Autry Pruitt. Autry, thank you so much for joining us. Hopefully your internet connection's all secure and we can hear you really well. First of all, did you watch Jimmy Kimmel's emotional return last night? And is it right that he's back? You did watch it?
Yes, I watched it in repeat, though, in replay, not live.
Okay, brilliant. Tell me what you thought of it. Are you happy he's back?
No, I'm not happy he's back, but I'm not happy he's bad as a consumer because he got 1 million views. Do you realize there are kids opening up toys on YouTube that have more viewers than Jimmy Kimmel? When I was on the radio, had more viewers than Jimmy Kimmel, which is crazy. And I wasn't paid anywhere near close to $20 million a year. So I'm not happy he's back for the sure reason is that this is about ideology over merit. right? Merit means if you get the audience back, for example, when Howard Stern was at his height and he was pushing back against, I'm a social conservative, but he was pushing back against social conservatives, he got his job, Howard Stern did, because he actually drew in an audience. Jimmy Kimmel is keeping his job because of ideology. If his ideology was whack, but he had an audience, I'd say, hey, he's making the money. But guess what? He's just keeping his job just for the sake of who he is, not because he does anything.
And I guess that's a fair point. But Audrey, I've heard this a lot. You know, Jimmy Kimmel is talentless. Donald Trump said, you know, his ratings are terrible. But aren't all ratings across the late night TV shows terrible at the moment? Isn't Kimmel just following part of that trend?
Except for Greg Gutfeld on Fox News has higher ratings than all of them. So his ratings are actually good. You're 100% right. Fox News, for those of you that don't know, is the conservative, most prominent conservative news network in the United States. That late night show is doing fantastic. And so you're right. This is an example of merit dwindling across the board. It should be driven by ratings. And by the way, in the United States, these public airwaves are not about free speech. It's about what's good for the public interest, as established in 1934 regarding the FCC.
And less than an hour before Kimmel's return and Donald Trump, he seemingly threatened to sue ABC over its decision to let Kimmel back on. How far is Trump willing to go to control the narrative, do you think, in the US?
Donald Trump is willing to go as far as he can, as far as Obama went, as far as President Biden went, President Obama, as far as President Clinton went. He's willing to go as far as the left-wing progressive Democrats do in the United States. That's how far he's willing to go.
And in comments aimed at President Trump and the FCC chair, Jimmy Kimmel said a government threat to silence a comedian the president doesn't like is anti-American. And listen, I thought we saw hundreds and hundreds of celebrities come out, sign a letter backing Jimmy Kimmel. Lots of people cancelled their Disney subscriptions. I mean, is people power concerning the Trump administration and the Republican Party?
I think there is concern there, but the concern is half-hammed at best. It's half-hearted. And the reason I can say that with such confidence is because during the Biden administration, the Biden government was going to Twitter, coordinating with them to ban conservatives such as Molly Hemingway, the editor of The Federalist, for example.
And that's actually been proved today, hasn't it, that Google did ban, or Twitter did ban, certain accounts on behalf of the Democratic government of Joe Biden. Tell us a little bit more about that story. It's not something I know in depth, but it has been making headlines on Fox News. I'm sure you watch it. As you said, it's doing really well in the evenings.
Yeah, so the sum total is this. There are special agencies within the government that were monitoring Facebook, monitoring Twitter, and the other prominent social media platforms in the United States. When an individual said something that they felt went against the government line in COVID, regarding COVID, or Hunter Biden's infamous laptop, which was discovered, which was Hunter Biden's actual laptop, by the way, the government apparatus would send a notice to the Twitter Risk Committee or to the Facebook Risk Committee and say, this person needs to be banned. And then the person would reply, we'll figure out a way how to ban them, even if they don't go against our terms and service. This is in black and white. There was a 130-page subcommittee report done on this in 2023. So this is clear and crystal as day that the governments of President Biden in particular, and also President Obama, were in coordination with agencies to ban private citizens. And by the way, as far as the public airwaves are concerned, it's not free speech. It's public interest. That's what was decided about these airwaves in the 1930s. Now, should it still be that way? Probably not, but that's the regime which we're under. And all Trump is doing is following what the regime has done in the past.
And just a quick thought for you. There are reports that the United Nations sabotaged an escalator to embarrass Donald Trump. And of course, we saw him yesterday saying the teleprompter doesn't work, the escalator at the UN didn't work either. What do you make of these allegations?
My simple take is, do I think it's possible that a rogue person in the United Nations maybe turned off the escalator or did something with the teleprompter? Yes, I think it's possible. Do I believe it was coordinated by the United Nations? No, I don't. But we've seen too many times when it comes to Donald Trump, rogue actors, both in the administrative state of the U.S. and on the globe, do things to President Trump just because they didn't like him.
Audrey Pruitt, I hope you don't think my show is whack, but all I want to say is thank you. Thank you so much for coming on it. Yeah. Always great to speak to you. Thank you once again. Now, Typhoon Raga has ripped through Hong Kong after leaving a trail of destruction in Taiwan and also the Philippines. At least 24 people have been killed in the strongest storm of the year. Raga is now hurtling towards southern China, bringing heavy rains to nearly a dozen provinces, putting even more lives at risk. For more on this, I'm joined from Bangkok by weather expert Jim Dale. Jim, a pleasure to have you on the show. Hiya. Which countries will be impacted by Raga, and will it maintain its super typhoon intensity as it moves along?
Okay, so we can bring you right up to date on this one. It's been through the Philippines and Taiwan. Obviously, some deaths involved there, and the count will go up. As you rightly point out, now it's in southern China, in many rural areas actually, northwest of a place called Leigh-Ann Gerrans. I guess most people don't know where that is, but it's heading through that southern China area, and finally then it's going to end up in Vietnam, the northern part. So just the expectation is it will go as far as Hanoi, but not as a typhoon. Let's make this absolutely clear. It is now losing its previous speed, which is around about 185 mile an hour sustained when it was doing that great damage over Taiwan, etc. It's now around about 90 miles an hour sustained, which is bad enough. But there's rainfall with it, particularly on the northern edge of the typhoon itself. So it is starting to decrease, and that will continue now over this next 24 hours. It'll become ex-tropical and end up, as I say, north of Hanoi.
So you're saying north of Hanoi in Vietnam, but you also spoke about the typhoon, which has already struck various countries, and it was obviously very, very detrimental. What kind of disruption has it caused, and can we expect the death toll to rise? And how have people made sure that their communities are safe?
Okay, well, the good thing about typhoons and hurricanes are the same, cyclones are the same, is we normally get some good warnings. This had good warnings attached to it. There was evacuations that occurred, particularly in China, in Hong Kong. So that's a good thing that we're able to track these things well in advance. In terms of the damage, obviously these next 24, 48 hours, it's going to unpeel itself. We're going to find out exactly how much structural damage has been caused. And remember, it's three aspects. So it's not just the fierceness of the winds, it's also the heaviness, the intensity of the rain, and tidal surges, which we've already seen on various social media outlets. So three areas that we've got to be aware of. And I think people in that part of the world tend to be much more advised than we perhaps would in some other parts of the world when it comes to typhoons or hurricanes. So hopefully we've got a situation where the death toll will not go too far higher. Obviously, people can put themselves in the wrong place at the wrong time. These things need what I would call, with a capital R, respect. If you respect these types of storms and do the right thing, take the authorities' warning seriously, then most of the time you'll come out of it unscathed and survive. But we'll see, as you rightly point out, Leigh-Ann, this particular storm in 2025 is the world's strongest storm so far. And to be honest with you, there's another one right behind it. Now, this might not get to the same category, but Bulio, I think it's called, is the next one, and it's already starting to form out to the east of the Philippines. So again, we're right in the middle of the season of typhoons and hurricanes. So just watch the space going forward over this next month.
Jim Dale, thank you so much for joining the show. Really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Now let's go back to the United Nations. Japan's Prime Minister has told the UN that Tokyo's recognition of the state of Palestine was only a question of time. Nearly 80% of UN members recognise the state of Palestine, with a string of countries, including Britain, Canada and France, adding their names this week after nearly 2 years of war in Gaza. Joining us exclusively is Saudi Prince Turki Al Faisal to discuss the latest on Palestinian recognition and also the two-state solution. Your Excellency, thank you so much for your time and thank you for joining us.
It's a pleasure to be with you. Thank you for having me.
Absolute pleasure. During the UN conference led by Saudi Arabia, we witnessed global governments recognizing a Palestinian state. How do you assess this response?
Well, it's a welcome response after 70 years of attempts to do that. And I'd say it's about time. And finally, most of the world, at least, recognizes the Palestinian state. And that is an accomplishment that we've been dreaming of for some time.
But some analysts say recognizing a Palestinian state is symbolic and has no effect on the ground when it comes to the people in Gaza. How will this initiative change the ongoing war between Israel and Hamas, and how will it change things in general?
I believe it will have an important effect on the way that the countries follow up on this recognition, because now there is a defined entity with borders that are negotiable, but land that belongs to Palestine. And depending on how the countries who recognize the Palestinian state continue in their support for Palestine by opposing the Israeli encroachment on Palestinian territory, what I call colonies, there will be substantial ramifications for that, because it means that the countries who recognize Palestine can take action to affect Israel's position on these policies that they pursue there.
And Your Excellency, let's touch a little bit on that, because, you know, in response to the recognition of a Palestinian state by many countries, it's infuriated Israel and Benjamin Netanyahu, and he hit back. And a lot of their response, they say, is to now annex the West Bank, which is raising lots of concern. What do you make of this response by Israel and the possible annexation of the West Bank, and what it will mean for the two-state solution? Oh, I do apologise, Your Excellency. Your mic seems to be off. You're unmuted. Would you be able to switch it back on for us, please? I wonder if you can hear me.
Yes.
Oh, great.
As I was saying, the Israelis have been stealing Palestinian land since they occupied it more than 60 years ago. And that is a declared policy of Israel. And just recently, we heard from Mr. Netanyahu that he will not allow a Palestinian state to come into being. So there is a virtual takeover of all of Palestine, and not just Gaza or bits of the West Bank. So that is what we are facing with, and that's what I meant by the countries that have recognized Palestine now need to follow up by protecting the sovereignty and the independence of the Palestinian state that they have recognized.
And Netanyahu did not hesitate to describe the decisions to recognize a Palestinian state as a reward for Hamas. How do you respond to this?
You know, that is a canard that the Israelis and unfortunately even their American allies are now promoting, because the thing that rewards Hamas is the oppression of the Palestinian people by Israel. Hamas as a movement that resists the occupation acquires popularity among the people of Palestine because the Israelis oppress them and deny them their rights. So that is the big reward that Hamas gets. It's from Israeli actions, not from the recognition of the Palestinian state.
But President Trump also said we have to get all 20 hostages back now and stop the Gaza war immediately. Without extra US pressure on Israel, is it possible to end the war or come to some sort of ceasefire?
I cannot see anybody pressuring Israel other than the United States. And that is something that now the France and Saudi Arabia, who are leading this effort to get recognition of the Palestinian state by the world, they have to follow up with the United States. And we saw recently, just yesterday or the day or today, the meeting between Monsieur Macron and Mr. Trump, in which Mr. Macron explained in public the Saudi-French joint effort to end the fighting and completely bring peace to Palestine and the rest of us in the area. So this is the effort now for not just Saudi Arabia and France, but all these countries that have recognized Palestine as a state.
So do you think Donald Trump is the only man who has the capability to pressure Israel and stop them when it comes to the occupation of Gaza City and the bombardment and the annexation of the West Bank?
Absolutely. He is the one. I hear from newspaper accounts and from media experts, even Israeli media experts, they say that Mr. Trump is more popular in Israel than Mr. Netanyahu. So he is the only one, I think, who can put the pressure and the squeeze on Israel to make it stop its genocidal war on the Palestinians.
And we have seen a near consensus, actually, regarding Hamas, especially among Western countries that have recognized the state of Palestine, where there appears to be a conditionality that Hamas has no future within any Palestinian state. How do you view this?
Well, that is something that was dealt with by the Saudi-French communique that came out about recognizing the Palestinian state and going forward to a peaceful settlement between Palestine and Israel. The wording of that statement takes into account that Hamas must give up its weaponry and arms and basically remove itself from the political equation. I think that can be done if Hamas is agreeable to it, through their joining the PLO. As you know, Hamas has been keeping its, it wants its cake and wants to eat it too. They are very reluctant to declare their full acceptance of the Arab Peace Initiative, which guarantees that there will be a peaceful settlement in this conflict. So that is what has to be done now if the Hamas recognizes that the Palestinian state must come into being.
And do you think that they could join forces with the PLO and that could be successful? Because one thing Israel has said, and many people from Israel who have spoken to me say the main plan is to completely eradicate Hamas and make sure they have no place in the future government inside Palestine. So is it possible that these two could join forces? How could this practically be done if Israel's plan is to eradicate the group?
Well, they've been trying to eradicate Hamas now for 2.5 years and haven't been successful in that. I don't see how they can have the ambition that they can eradicate Hamas. And so it is for them to negotiate with the PLO and the Palestinian Authority on how the parameters and the conditions of the new state are to be. If Hamas is going to be fully integrated into the PLO and become committed to the same conditions that the PLO has accepted, that is one way that Hamas will remove itself as an independent entity from Palestinian political life. That is one way of achieving the result of removing Hamas as an obstacle to a peaceful settlement between Israel and Palestine.
Your Excellency, I want to talk a little bit about negotiations that were going on in Qatar, of course, which included Hamas and Israel as they were trying to work towards some sort of agreement. And we did see Israel launch bombs in Doha at the delegation. How serious was this, and how can negotiations resume after Israel did launch these strikes on Doha?
This is the how can I put it? This is the exposure of Israel for what it is, a treacherous and an unreliable potential partner for peace in the area. They negotiate and let the Qataris negotiate a settlement for the Gaza conflict, and then they bomb the country that is negotiating this conflict. So this is par for the course for the Israelis. And I was not surprised by this because Israel has been treacherous throughout its history in the area.
Do you think that Israel is becoming more of a concern to its neighbors and Arab countries in this region?
I think it is becoming more of a concern to the Jewish community in the world. You've seen that in the demonstrations that take place, the public demonstrations that take place throughout the world, that Jewish people are joining in those demonstrations to oppose Israel's actions against the Palestinians. And many Jewish rabbis and important people have declared their opposition to the Netanyahu government conduct vis-a-vis the Palestinian people. So this is not just a danger to us, but even Jewish people consider it to be a danger to them.
And if I can just bring you back to what the plan is the day after Israel's offensive into Gaza City ends, and also the continuous bombardment of Gaza that we have seen. We haven't heard much of what happens once this is over and how the Palestinian people get their lives back to normal and their future. Do you have any idea of how that looks?
I am not privy to the talks that took place between the French and the Saudi partners in this effort to end the war and bring peace to the area. I'm sure they have in their plans definitive ideas about the day after. And if we just review the statement that came out a month ago, I think it was, or nearly that about their idea of what peace means in the Middle East, particularly towards the Palestinians. We can see that they have a plan already to install. I think there is supposed to be some sort of council that takes over in Gaza, and the removal of the weaponry, as I mentioned, from Hamas, and then the integration of that Gaza area into the Palestinian Authority, etc. So these are things that I think the French and the Saudis have been working on, and I'm not privy to them.
And do you have any idea who would finance the rebuilding of Gaza? That's been a big question. Where would the financial input come from?
I think the financial issue should come from the world, because basically this is not just a simple question of Palestine versus Israel, but it's a worldwide issue that has been on the books since 1948. And the voting of the big countries in 1948 that created Israel should be responsible for financing the so-called day after and what goes on from there.
And also, I was just wondering, you know, the UN Commission said that there is a genocide happening within Gaza City.
Yes.
And I wonder what your thoughts are on that, because Israel said there's no genocide happening, the UN is biased. Do you believe that there is a genocide?
Absolutely. I'm not an expert on these issues, but experts themselves have said so, including some Israelis who are, quite frank about their definition of genocide, and that it applies to what the Israelis are doing to the Palestinians. So in my mind, it's a clear-cut case of genocide against the Palestinians.
But why isn't the UN doing enough to open these aid corridors to get food to the people of Gaza? This has been a big question. And yesterday we did see Donald Trump criticize the UN and say they actually don't do much. They just have talks, but nothing actually happens. Do you think the UN has been effective in helping these people and reach the people who really need it? Or what more needs to be done?
If we remove the veto of the United States from these considerations, the United Nations can do its job. Unfortunately, it's the US veto that stymies the actions of the United Nations, not just in Palestine, but in other places as well. And we see that also Russia has used the veto power vis-a-vis Ukraine, etc. So the veto is the stumbling block that prevents the UN from doing its job.
Perhaps the most notable thing that we are currently observing at the moment is that the Saudi initiative for a two-state solution has gained significant momentum, especially among Western countries. How will the kingdom build on this momentum and make sure that diplomacy wins the day?
Well, I'm sure that the leadership in the kingdom, King Salman and Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman, have in mind what to follow up with on the Arab Peace Initiative that the late King Abdullah presented to the world nearly 23 years ago. And it's been an effort that has been left on the table since that time because the Israelis have not accepted it. Had they accepted it when it was first presented, we would not be in this place now.
And let's just talk a little bit about the Abraham Accords, because Donald Trump did get many countries to do normalization ties with Israel during his first term. And Donald Trump was really praised for the Abraham Accords and the normalization of ties between some Arab nations and Israel. What's the future of the Abraham Accords?
Well, you know, the kingdom is not party to the so-called Abraham Accords. And in the past, I have made public statements that my view is that so-called Abraham Accords do not deserve that name, actually, because Saudi Arabia is not yet part of them. The Prophet Abraham, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he actually came to Mecca, as you know, in his pursuit of the service to God and the establishment of the Holy Kaaba. And unless the kingdom becomes party to any future agreement that envisions the establishment of a Palestinian state and the right of self-determination for the Palestinian people and the capital in East Jerusalem, I don't consider them to be Abrahamic. Some people may disagree with me, but that is my view.
And Your Excellency, just before I let you go, what would you like the future of Palestine to look like for the people who are there? And how do you hope a resolution is reached?
That is something I think all of us hope for, peace. You know, my late father had a wish to conduct a trip to Jerusalem before he died. Unfortunately, his death preceded that event. But I too, I have publicly said that I hope before I die that I'll be able to visit the mosque in Jerusalem. It will be a crowning achievement for humanity to finally put this conflict to end, and the Palestinian people to get their full rights as was envisioned in the initial UN resolution back in 1948. This is a desire that I wish, and I hope everybody will be of equal demand for that desire.
Prince Turki Al Faisal, yes, we all hope for peace. And I want to say thank you so much for your time and thank you for joining me.
Thank you.
Pleasure. A reminder of our top stories. Zelenskyy warns that Russia aims to expand the war beyond Ukraine as he urges more international military support. Iran vows it will never seek nuclear weapons and slams Israel at the UN. Jimmy Kimmel makes an emotional return to late-night TV defending free speech after a controversial suspension. And that's all from us on W News. Don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel and, of course, follow us on X. Plus, we'll be back in a couple of hours with W News Extra. Goodbye and thank you.